So what is it all about then? What is the predicament? What have taken precedence? Is this a question of identity? A question of misplaced sense of self? What is it all about? Is there anything that is not as it's supposed to be or meant to be? Is there anything that needs adjusting? Or is it simply a matter of acceptance? A matter of surrendering to what is? Where is the predicament? Can this simply be understood once and for all? Can this simply be understood once inferred and understood once and for all, so that nothing then impedes that what simply is? One way or another, everything sooner or later, funneled by the question of who am I? Everything is brought to that ultimate sense of reconciliation of who am I? Who am I is not a question. Why is it not a question? Because it cannot be answered, and because it does not have an answer. It's not a question to answer. Even if, in terms of the way of the grammar, it comes across as who am I in this drama of life? Question of identity. But who am I doesn't require an answer, and it cannot be answered. Presuppositions can be made. Certain points of view taken, yes, but it cannot be answered to the degree of truly what that inquiry represents. Who There was a band, rock band in the UK, back in the days, under that name. Pete Townshend, Archives of Rock History. We're not talking about Led Zepp here, but everyone knows about. These are more like select few, survived, still kicking around. Who also is the first name of the Vedic highest deity. Before any epithet can be applied, there was Ka. Before any Brahma, Shiva, Vishnu, and the whole pantheon, there was just that. Who? Ka. As far as the Upanishads and as far as the ancient books goes, in the lore of that tradition. Before any term can be utilized, there was this simply a matter of who. That's what Ka stands for. And Ka is not who am I. It's simply who. I don't know if the members of the band in Britain back in the late 60s were aware of that, or they were simply inspired by something that slipped into collective consciousness, released during the time of great cross-pollination. After all, this were the immediate aftermath of the counterculture, a big onslaught of Eastern spirituality on the West, en masse. Meditation becomes household activity. But who is an open question? Who is an opening? Who? So the forebearers of that would give the world perhaps the most elaborate, certainly the richest, in terms of its all-embracing, all-encapsulating, as well as in terms of its varieties, a library of spiritual output that India, known for, came up with that open question, Ka. A title of one of the Roberto Calas's books entitled that simply Ka. Highly recommend. It's not a novel. You can't read it. It's like fragments excavated, bits and pieces of archaeological importance, redolent with that. Timeless wisdom, fragrant, despite the fact that they are artifacts. So I'd like to begin with that Ka, piece of paper, open question. Who? That's here what is being brought straight forth in terms of the get-going, so that we can begin to inquire here in terms of what is taking place. So that the question of identity is not somehow conveniently, immediately being put at the forefront of accusation of why we are robbed of our essential nature. So that we don't somehow easily adopt that attitude of, oh yeah, I've been identified with body, mind, thoughts, history, background, and so forth, and therefore I'm somehow no longer feel like Brahman. Yes, it would do perhaps. There's always poor man's supper. There's better something to put on the table than nothing. But we cannot chew on the same thing over and over and over. After all, we live at the time of the finality, because it's a time of great reset, one way or another. There is a reset going on as we gathered here, a great reset. Whatever that reset brings about, we have no idea, we have no access to it. Only those who keep consciousness at the needle point can entertain some ideas of what the world of shapes and forms to come. But us, simple folk, are clueless in terms of what it will be like. We may speculate, we may contemplate, we may bounce around with fantastic ideas that, oh, we will create our world. If someone's still under these illusions of one's imagination, nothing wrong with that. But the world is already created. The world is already created, being formed, sculpted at that level. Sculpted at the level of steel where things are cooling off. So the question of who here is of importance. An open uttering. Because with this, what we also speak of as the great reset, in whatever ways that we can define this, I'm not just speaking about how it is figures out there in social media in relation to social economical changes. But the conversations of futility of seeking has been going on for a while. The futility of seeking is now a mature adult. He was a kid in the 90s. The futility of seeking. If the 60s and the 70s and what have you could be considered to be the decades of seeking and seekers, spiritual movements, gurus and disciples, all these begin to gradually fall apart, sometimes circa 90s, with the arrival of the non-duality, where that strong proposition, there's nothing to seek because there is no seeker. Seeking becomes an excuse not to find, and so forth. You can tune into this. There are many still teachers out there who still add their own voice to that whole spiritual enchilada of all toys and toing and froing, of whether this is at all has any value. So the question of identity here is of primal importance, because accordingly, that what everyone seeks cannot be found, simply because it was never lost to begin with. Fine. But also because that what one seeks cannot be ever understood, because it is by virtue of which everything is known. So even if the Upanishads declare, know that by virtue of which everything is known, but you cannot know the knower. You can know the known, and that's all you know. But you cannot know the knower, because the knower is that what knows. Otherwise, it would be receded ad infinitum. There will always be knower of the knower of the knower of the knower, is it not? So the knower, subject, cannot be known, because subject is that what knows. So this is the main platform, the very, very positioning of why some teachers simply go and off the bat, there's no seeking, waste of time. You've been trying to seek, you've been trying to find, you've been trying to locate that what cannot be lost, because it was never lost. All belongs to the sphere of the language. So this is why I feel it is very good to position ourselves from get-going to what is this whole thing about, so that there is a clarity of understanding, so that we can deal with this once and for all, and all is left is to give oneself to that what the true term sadhana represents, because the term sadhana has nothing to do with seeking. This is also very clear that this presuppositions this positioning of largely Western audiences that you have been fooled. There's nothing to seek. Graduate right now. But in terms of perennial understanding, it was never about seeking. It was never about Tom, Dick, and Harry, Sharon and Tracy and Wendy going on some kind of tour de force for spiritual realization. No, it was never about that. It was always about something else. How it came about to be somehow, or it's all about seeking something what one may be lost at some point in time. In perennial terms, in terms of how it always was, there was always this something which at some point begins to dawn on us, that everything is settled here and nowhere else. In this day and age, certainly. Everything's settled here by virtue of that understanding that there is no other. By virtue of that understanding that subject and object are embraced in this time-bending, willing, whatever, dance. And this, what is called seeking, has nothing to do with how it gotten to be known. But there are lofty understandings of what sadhana represents. I keep referring to it is what makes planets staying in their orbits. It's what makes the respective deities of respective realms satisfied, so they don't go craved, and out of craving all this begins to crumble. So the affair of being human is already encapsulated in that car. The affair of being human already encapsulated in that who, and anything that comes after that. We're speaking about prior to I am. We're speaking about prior to this concept of aham. Ka here is simply presupposition. Who can I be? That's the definition of the ancient, whatever then later name it will be known for, or known by. So this very clearly need to be understood, that there is no such thing as a fixed point in time or identity fixed in point in time. That in itself is the greatest of tricks. This is where truly we speak of as that power, the trickster, the Maya. That's where it truly plays that trick. But in essence, it's always an open question. Always an open question. So therefore, we begin this inquiry with that redefining the sense of what even identity, let alone misplaced identity here. Because if we look into it clearly, nothing has ever been misplaced. Everything unfolds in the way that it can unfold, in no other way. So this is why the philosophy of Trikashaivism serves today just as much as it did back in the day, when some of its principal tenets were put forth, elucidated on, contemplated, given another scrutiny, given another stab. So there is this clarity of what is individual in relation to the ultimate. What is that individual versus universal? Who is here the individual? And what is the universal? Who is who? So we begin with who. We begin with Ka. So we'll give it some sketches in a moment to give ourselves maybe another stab at it, slightly differently, drawing it, sketching it out, so as to afford some variety from how we've been speaking about it and how we've been representing it visually. But this is very important because it requires to be understood only once. It's not something that one can try to understand over a period of time. It can only be understood once, but it can be contemplated for the rest of one's days. It can be reflected upon for the rest of one's days. And then, so there is a clarity that sadhana is something which unfolds irrespective. Some of us become more acutely aware of what it means and what it represents, and it has no longer confused with seeking. Sadhana is basically holding heaven whilst being fully rooted in earth. I'm not talking about Atlas apples. I'm not talking about the Titan punished at the Gibraltar. I'm not talking about the ancient Mediterranean mythology, the guy who is sweating his butt off for mispleasing the gods and having to hold skies now, right? And Hercules comes to Heracles to get the pointers to how to get those apples. We're not talking about that. This is not the kind of thing. It's not a burden. It's not a burden. By definition, a relationship between sadhana and dharma, if one wants to take it as a burden, it's not. It's why we're here, in this particular form, in this particular way. And one way or another, it's not even up to us. And this is where the dance is. This is I am and I'm not. It is only because of how things are squarely settled here. It is only because I am and what I am and who I am, and it has nothing to do with me. These two complete and utter irreconcilable extremes are working always at once. And that very fine line is what it means to walk a human life with dignity and grace, or with dignity and in grace. Is knowing that one always carries heaven with all the deities intact, all the planets respectively, majestically, circumambulating the sun in their orbits. Everything remains intact because it is checked here. And at the same time, one doesn't move a pinky, one is not involved. It's not about me, it's not personal, never was. So before we talk about whether this is about acceptance, surrender, realization, it's something else. It's something else. So everyone who flocks to these conversations, dialogues, mostly monologues, by those who are supposed to set you free, it's only a sliver of something, only a corner lifted. Yes, indeed, there's no seeking, and that's what the prevalent talk conversation's been past 2 decades, more and more emphatically. There's nothing to seek, because you can't find that what was never lost. You are who you are. I am who I am. But that's not what the whole thing is about. It was not about me or you. And so those who are touched by grace know that directly. Know that it was never personal. So, but understanding of that relationship needs to happen at once, so it grasped in full essence of what it represents. And then one can reflect on this. And that whole unfoldment, that whole sadhana, in a way, is a reflection of that, how it squares itself, how it settles its affairs here. Nothing is pushed here, nothing is pushed aside here. Nothing is forced here. Everything unfolds in the way that it does. Nobody tries to open one's third eye here. No one tries to work with energy wheels. Nobody tries to do anything that is in the domain of, if you don't know how the perfect Swiss or Japanese watch is made, what, you think you can repair it? You think you can adjust that perfectly set in motion mechanism? Because that's what a lot of modern New Age spirituality is. Let me get the screw and, screwdriver. Oh, I'm going to do here and do there. Let's tune this chakra, let's tune that, Doesn't work like that at all. So when we will do this, give it to the drawing, it will at least schematically, at least graphically, should give that immediate sense of why that is and what's here acts as a mover and shaker. So that also the question of identity is fully re-examined, revisited. The question of identity. So that the individual identity is no longer somehow left to the peripheral affair of meandering and lingering, not knowing who am I, or what am I, what's the purpose of it all, why can't I just have my life in a normal fashion? Why do I have to go through this or that? Why is it even this awakening? Why do I need to go through this? Why can't I just live and enjoy my life? I'm fine, I'll meditate if you want me to meditate, right? I do charity, I'll do this. It's like, just leave me alone. For God's sake, what have I done? I have mortgage to pay, job to do, kids to put through schools. I've got things to, So be reasonable, whoever that is. So this is why we start with ka.